Blackwell, surely you'd like to consider all your options before... I know what I'm looking for, Ms. Wilson. Tom's tone was final. He turned back to Elena. I can drive you out to the ranch this afternoon if that suits you. Say 2 o'clock? I'll pick you up here. Elena nodded, scarcely believing this sudden change in fortune. Yes, thank you. After Tom left, Martha's pleasant facade vanished. Don't get your hopes up, she hissed. A job as a nurse teacher is not the same as a marriage proposal. The Blackwells can afford any bride Tom wants. He's just being charitable. But Elena wasn't listening. For the first time since arriving in America, she felt the faintest stirring of possibility. Not just survival, but something more. When Tom arrived to collect her that afternoon, Elena was waiting outside the cafe, her heart racing with equal parts anxiety and anticipation. His truck was dust-covered but well-maintained, much like the man himself. He helped her into the passenger seat with a courtesy that felt natural rather than performative. As they drove through the Montana landscape, Elena was struck by its vast, wild beauty, so different from the tight clusters of buildings and orderly fields of her Ukrainian village. Here, space stretched endlessly, broken only by distant mountains that seemed to touch the impossibly blue sky. How long have you been in Pinecrest? Tom asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Only since yesterday, Elena admitted. It has been. Challenging start. Tom nodded, keeping his eyes on the winding road. Martha Wilson has a reputation, not all of it good. She thinks I am too old, Elena said, deciding honesty was the best approach. For marriage, at least. A half smile tugged at Tom's mouth. Martha Wilson thinks anything over 25 has 1 foot in the grave. Personally, I found that people usually don't get interesting until at least 30. The Blackwell Ranch appeared suddenly as they crested a hill, a sprawling property with a large main house, several outbuildings, and fenced pastures dotted with cattle. It had a timeless, solid quality, like something from another era that had somehow persisted into the present. William Bill Blackwell was waiting on the porch when they arrived. Despite the stroke that had affected one side of his body, he stood tall and dignified, using a cane for support. His resemblance to his son was striking, the same blue eyes, the same direct gaze that seemed to evaluate without judgment. Dad, this is Elena Petrovich, Tom introduced, the teacher I mentioned. Bill extended his good hand, his grip firm. When he spoke, his words came slowly, with visible effort. Welcome to our home, Ms. Petrovich. Over tea in the ranch's spacious kitchen, Elena learned that Bill had been an avid reader all his life until the stroke robbed him of that pleasure. His frustration was palpable as he explained, with Tom occasionally helping find words, how the letters seemed to scramble before his eyes now. I miss Hemingway, Bill said, the name coming out clearly, as if he'd practiced it often. And Steinbeck. Elena felt an immediate connection to this proud man who refused to surrender to his circumstances. I can help, she said with quiet confidence. There are techniques, special exercises. We can start with short passages, build slowly. For the next hour, they talked about books and teaching methods. Elena demonstrated a few simple exercises using a newspaper on the table, and Bill's eyes lit with hope when he successfully read a headline without stumbling. As the afternoon sun began to lower, Tom showed Elena around the property. The ranch was even more impressive up close, a self-contained world with its own rhythms and rules. He explained the cattle operation, the seasonal work, the challenges of ranching in Montana's unforgiving climate. The position would include the cabin, Tom said, pointing to a small but charming structure near the main house. It was my grandmother's art studio. Dad converted it after she passed. It has everything you'd need, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, and you'd take meals with us in the main house if you wanted. The cabin was perfect, Simple, clean, with large windows that caught the afternoon light. Elena could easily imagine herself there, could see books on the shelves, could picture herself grading papers at the small desk in the corner. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "The job would include working with Dad 5 days a week, a few hours each day," Tom continued. "The rest of your time would be your own. We pay fairly, and as I mentioned, room and board are included." It seemed too good to be true. The kind of opportunity that happened to other people, not to Elena Petrovich, who had always had to fight for every small advantage. She waited for the catch, for the moment when it would all fall apart. Instead, Tom said, "Dad likes you, so do I. The position is yours if you want it." Elena felt tears prickle behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. "I would be honored." That evening, Tom drove her back to the inn to collect her belongings. Martha Wilson was in the lobby when they entered, her eyes widening at the sight of them together. "Mr. Blackwell, what a pleasant surprise. Have you had time to consider meeting some of our other candidates?" Tom shook his head politely. "No need, Miss Wilson. I've offered Ms. Petrovich a position at the ranch. She'll be working with my father." Martha's smile thinned. "How charitable of you, though if you're interested in a more traditional arrangement, Ruby is still available, and we have several other young ladies arriving next month." Eleanor watched as Tom's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Ms. Wilson, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not in the market for a bride. I'm hiring a qualified teacher for my father." As Elena packed her few belongings in her room, Martha appeared in the doorway, her expression sour. "You think you're clever, don't you? Worming your way into the Blackwell household." Elena continued folding her clothes methodically. "I am qualified for job he offered, that is all. He's the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties. Every matchmaker from here to California has tried to interest Tom Blackwell in their girls. He's never even looked twice." Martha leaned against the doorframe. "Don't get ideas. A job is not a marriage proposal, especially not for a woman your age." Eleanor finally turned to face her. "I did not come to America to trap wealthy husband, Ms. Wilson. I came for better life. This job offers that." "What do you mean?" Tom set his mug down, choosing his words carefully. "Stephen Mills is my second cousin. He asked me to check on you when he couldn't meet you himself. He didn't abandon your arrangement. He was injured in a farming accident. 2 days before your arrival, broke both legs when his tractor overturned." Eleanor stared at him, processing this revelation. But Martha said, "Martha lied. Stephen was heartbroken that he couldn't meet you. He asked me to make sure you were taken care of until he recovered. I was going to explain the situation when I met you at the cafe." Tom paused. "But then I heard how Martha was treating you, and I got to talking with you and..." "And?" Eleanor prompted when he didn't continue. "And I realized I didn't want to deliver you to Stephen or anyone else." The admission seemed to surprise Tom as much as it did Eleanor. "I wanted you to stay, here, with us." The world seemed to... Still, the night air charged with unspoken possibilities. "As your father's teacher," Elena said carefully. "At first, yes." Tom met her gaze steadily. "But now I'm hoping for more." The next morning, as dawn broke over Blackwell Ranch, Elena stood at the window of her cabin, watching the first golden rays touch the distant mountains. Last night still felt like a dream. Tom's quiet declaration, their long conversation on the porch, his gentle kiss as they finally said goodnight. A knock at her door pulled her from her reverie. Tom stood there, Stetson in hand, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy. "Morning." He cleared his throat. "Dad's asking for you. Says he needs to show you. Something important." Bill was waiting in the main house, seated at the kitchen table with an old book open before him. His face lit up when Elena entered. "Watch," he said simply, then began to read aloud from the page. The words came slowly, but clearly, a passage from Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea that they had been working on for days. When he finished, Elena felt tears of pride spring to her eyes. "Perfect, you did it." Bill smiled, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Couldn't have, without you." He pushed a small box across the table toward her. "For you, family. See?" Confused, Elena opened the box to find a delicate silver ring with a single sapphire. She looked up, startled, to find Tom now kneeling beside her chair. "Elena Petrovich," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I know it's fast, and I know we have much to learn about each other. But I've seen your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. I know the woman you are. Will you marry me?" Marriage, the very thing that had brought her to America, but now offered under such different circumstances, not as a transaction or a last resort, but as a choice, a beginning rather than an ending. "Your father approves?" she asked, although Bill's beaming face already gave her the answer. "It was his idea," Tom admitted with a laugh. "He's been telling me to propose since your first week here." Elena looked from father to son, these two men who had welcomed her into their lives and their home, who had seen value in her when others saw only limitations. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." Elena and Tom's wedding day had been everything she never dared to dream. The small church in Pinecrest overflowed with winter blooms, and candlelight transforming the humble space into something magical. Standing beside her husband at the reception, listening to his father give a heartfelt, if halting speech about love finding its way, despite all obstacles, Elena felt a sense of belonging she had been searching for her entire life. After Martha Wilson and her young protégé Ruby departed, the matchmaker's tight smile barely masking her disbelief at how events had unfolded, Elena found herself surrounded by the warmth of her new community. The town doctor, Sophia Chen, had become a close friend during the months of Elena's engagement, and now she approached with a glass of champagne and a conspiratorial smile. "To think Martha tried to convince Tom that you were too old," Sophia said, shaking her head, "as if 30 is ancient. I didn't even meet my husband until I was 34. Elena accepted the champagne with a laugh. "Martha believes youth is the only currency women have. I feel sorry for her in a way. To see the world through such narrow eyes must be limiting." "Well, her loss is definitely Pinecrest's gain." Sophia clinked her glass against Eleanor's. "It's about time we had another professional woman in town. The school board is already talking about offering you a position when the current literature teacher retires next year." The possibility of returning to classroom teaching, combining her love of literature with her new life in Montana, filled Elena with quiet excitement. While she had found unexpected fulfillment in helping Bill regain his reading abilities, the thought of inspiring young minds again tugged at her heart. "I would like that very much," she admitted. As the evening progressed, Elena found herself drawn into the orbit of the Blackwell family's history through conversations with longtime ranch hands and neighbors. She learned that the land had been in Tom's family for 4 generations, that his mother had died when he was just 15, that before the stroke, Bill had been known as the finest horseman in 3 counties. Each story added another layer to her understanding of the man she had married. Tom found her as the celebration was winding down, slipping an arm around her waist and pressing a kiss to her temple. "Ready to escape," he murmured. They bid their Goodbyes amid good-natured teasing from the remaining guests, and Tom drove them not to the main house, but to the cabin that had been Elena's home these past months. Except now, she noticed as they approached, soft light glowed from every window, and the porch had been decorated with garlands of pine and twinkling lights. "I thought we might stay here tonight," Tom said, helping her from the truck. "The main house will still be full of people cleaning up, and Dad insisted we should have privacy." Elena felt a flutter of nervousness as Tom lifted her into his arms to carry her across the threshold, a tradition she had only read about in American novels. Inside, the cabin had been transformed. Fresh flowers filled every surface. The fireplace blazed with a welcoming fire, and someone had turned down the bed and scattered rose petals across the quilt. "Sophia's work," Tom explained with a grin. "She said it was traditional." Elena doubted that, but the gesture touched her deeply. She moved to the fireplace, warming her hands as Tom opened a bottle of champagne that had been chilling in a silver bucket. Despite the months of growing closer, the private moments they had shared on the porch of this very cabin, there was something different about tonight, a significance that filled the air between them. "Second thoughts?" Tom asked quietly, handing her a glass. Elena shook her head, looking up at the man who had seen value in her when others had seen only limitations. "No, only gratitude for everything that brought me here, even Martha Wilson." Tom laughed at that, the sound rich and warm in the intimate space. "I suppose we do owe her something. If she hadn't been so dismissive, I might never have found the courage to speak up that day in the cafe." "You never told me," Elena said, setting down her glass and moving closer. "What made you notice me? There were younger women there, prettier women. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." His hands came to rest at her waist, steady and sure. "I noticed you because while everyone else in that room was looking for something, attention, validation, a transaction, you were offering something. Your skills, your experience, your determination. You weren't waiting to be chosen. You were finding your own way forward." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "It was the most attractive thing I'd ever seen." Later, as moonlight filtered through the cabin windows, Elena lay in her husband's arms, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. The journey that had brought her to this moment seemed almost dreamlike now. The desperate courage it had taken to leave Ukraine, the fear of being stranded in a strange country, the crushing words from Martha Wilson that had nearly broken her. "Spirit, too old at 30, she whispered. The phrase that had once stung, now almost humorous in retrospect. Tom's arms tightened around her. "Perfect at 30, he corrected softly. Spring came to Blackwell Ranch with a sudden, verdant explosion of wildflowers and new growth. The winter had been harsh but productive. Elena had continued working with Bill, whose reading had improved so dramatically he had started a book club with several other ranchers. Tom had secured a lucrative new contract for their grass-fed beef, and Elena had been officially offered a position teaching literature at Pinecrest High School starting in the fall. Life settled into rhythms both familiar and new. Elena found herself adapting to ranch life more easily than she had expected, learning to ride from Tom, helping with the gentler aspects of cattle management, and even developing a fondness for the enormous, shaggy ranch dog named Dostoevsky, or Dozy, as Bill affectionately called him, who had adopted Elena as his special charge. The only shadow on her happiness was the lack of news from Ukraine. She had written to her few remaining friends in the village, sent packages at Christmas, but as spring deepened, she had received only silence in return. The distance, both physical and emotional, from her homeland sometimes hit her with unexpected force, a pang of dislocation that could strike even in the midst of her new contentment. Tom found her one evening, sitting on their porch. They had kept the cabin as their home, preferring its coziness to the larger main house, staring at an old photograph of her parents standing in front of their modest Ukrainian home. "Bad news?" he asked gently, settling beside her. "No news," Elena sighed, "which is almost worse. I know the mail service is unreliable, but—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the particular loneliness of being cut off from one's roots. Tom was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "What if we visited? This fall, after calving season, but before the school year starts. We could go for a few weeks, see your friends, visit your parents' graves." The suggestion caught Elena off guard. She had never imagined returning to Ukraine, had assumed that chapter of her life was closed forever when she boarded the plane to America. "You would do that? Travel so far?" "Of course," Tom said simply. "It's part of who you are. I want to understand all of you, not just the parts that fit neatly into life here." The casual generosity of the offer brought unexpected tears to Elena's eyes. This perhaps was the true meaning of partnership, not just sharing a home or a bed, but carrying each other's histories with equal care. The first signs of morning sickness caught Elena by surprise in late April. At first, she dismissed the waves of nausea as a reaction to the rich beef stew they'd had for dinner the night before. But when the symptoms persisted for a full week, accompanied by a bone-deep fatigue, unlike anything she had experienced before, Elena finally made an appointment with Sophia. The doctor's confirmation was both thrilling and terrifying. "About 8 weeks along, I'd say," Sophia announced after the examination. "Everything looks perfectly normal. Pregnant. At 30, almost 31 now. The age Martha Wilson had deemed nearly barren. Too old to be a desirable bride." Elena couldn't help the bubble of vindictive satisfaction that rose alongside her joy. She waited until that evening to tell Tom, after dinner, when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for, shock giving way to wonder, then unadulterated joy as he gathered her into his arms, laughing and crying all at once. "A baby," he kept saying, as if testing the reality of the words. "Our baby." Bill's reaction the next morning was equally emotional. The progress he had made with his speech allowed him to express his delight more fluently than would have been possible months earlier. "Never thought I'd live to see it," he admitted, eyes suspiciously bright. "Tommy's child, a new Blackwell." News traveled fast in a small town like Pinecrest. By the end of the week, it seemed everyone knew about the coming addition to the Blackwell family. Casseroles and hand-knitted baby blankets began appearing on their porch, along with books of baby names and well-meaning but often contradictory advice from the community's mothers and grandmothers. Only Martha Wilson maintained a frosty distance, though Eleanor occasionally caught the matchmaker watching her with an unreadable expression when they crossed paths in town. In a community as small as Pinecrest, complete avoidance was impossible. They encountered each other at the grocery store, at church, at community events. Their exchanges remained coolly polite, neither woman willing to acknowledge the awkwardness between them. Elena was selecting tomatoes at the town's small grocery store one afternoon in her 4th month, her pregnancy now just beginning to show when Martha approached, Ruby trailing behind her as always. "Mrs. Blackwell," Martha greeted, her with a tight smile. "I understand congratulations are in order." Eleanor nodded politely. "Thank you, Miss Wilson." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them until Ruby stepped forward, her young face earnest. "Is it true you're going to be teaching at the high school? Literature?" "Yes," Elena confirmed, surprised by the girl's interest. "Starting in September, though with the baby coming in November, I'll likely take a leave before returning in the spring." Ruby's eyes lit up. "I've been thinking about taking classes, getting my high school diploma. I never finished back home. This was unexpected. Elena had assumed Ruby was much younger, perhaps 19 or 20, but if she hadn't completed high school, she might be even younger than that. The thought made Elena's heart ache. How desperate must the girl have been to leave her home and travel to a strange country as a mail-order bride? Before Elena could respond, Martha cut in sharply. Ruby doesn't need education. She needs a husband. That's what she came here for. Ruby flinched slightly at Martha's tone, but kept her gaze steady on Elena. I'd like to have options. Something in the quiet determination of the girl's voice resonated with Elena. How many times had she herself wished for options, for alternatives to the narrow path that seemed predestined for women in her village? The night school program is excellent, Elena said directly to Ruby, ignoring Martha's disapproving frown. Classes meet 3 evenings a week. If you're interested, I could help you register. Martha made a dismissive sound, but Ruby nodded eagerly. I'd like that, thank you. As Elena drove home, she found herself thinking about Ruby's situation with growing concern. How many other women had Martha brought to America with promises of security, only to trade them like commodities to the highest bidder? The matchmaking. Business wasn't illegal, but Martha's methods, her disdain for the women in her care, her emphasis on youth and compliance over all other qualities, left a sour taste in Elena's mouth. She mentioned the encounter to Tom that evening as they prepared dinner together in the cabin's small kitchen. To her surprise, he nodded, his expression grim. Sheriff Cooper has had concerns about Martha's operation for years, he explained, chopping vegetables with practiced efficiency. Nothing concrete enough to take action, but there have been rumors. Women arriving with unrealistic expectations. Men paying substantial fees for introductions. At least one bride who disappeared after a month with her new husband, a man with a history of domestic violence that Martha almost certainly knew about. Elena paused in the act of setting the table, a chill running through her. That's horrible. These women are vulnerable, far from home, often with limited English. They deserve protection, not exploitation. Tom nodded, his jaw tight. Cooper's hands are tied without evidence or complaints. Most of the women are too afraid or too isolated to speak up. That night, Elena lay awake, long after Tom had fallen asleep, thinking about Ruby and the other women Martha had brought to America. Women seeking the same things Elena herself had sought: security, opportunity, perhaps even love. The difference was that Elena had found those things, had been incredibly fortunate in her marriage to Tom. But what about the others? The idea that took shape in the quiet darkness seemed simultaneously obvious and audacious. By morning, it had crystallized into a plan, and over breakfast, Elena presented it to Tom and Bill. A women's center, she explained, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug, decaffeinated now, a concession to her pregnancy. A place where immigrant women could find resources, English classes, job training, legal advice, somewhere they could go if they needed help or just information. Tom considered this, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive, which Elena counted as a positive sign. It's a good idea in theory, but practically speaking, the nearest women's shelter is in Bozeman, almost 3 hours away. Not a shelter exactly, Elena clarified. More like a community center with specific resources for women who are new to America. A place where someone like Ruby could learn about night school or job opportunities without having to go through Martha Wilson. Bill, who had been listening intently, spoke up. The old Miller property. In town. Empty for years now. Tom nodded, slowly, understanding his father's shorthand. The Miller place could work. It's been vacant since Hank passed away 3 years ago. His children moved to California and haven't been able to sell it. It's a good location, walking distance from the center of town, but private enough. Would it be expensive? Elena asked cautiously. She had been saving her salary from working with Bill, but it wouldn't be nearly enough to purchase property. Probably not as expensive as you might think, Tom mused. Property values in Pinecrest aren't exactly booming, and... He glanced at his father, who nodded encouragement. The Blackwell Family Foundation could probably help with the initial purchase and renovation costs. Elena blinked in surprise. The Blackwell Family Foundation. Tom had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. We set it up about 5 years ago, Dad's idea. The ranch has been profitable, and we wanted to give back to the community. So far, we've funded the new roof for the school and helped rebuild the community center after the fire. This was the first Elena had heard of any foundation. She knew the Blackwells were comfortable financially. The size and condition of the ranch made that obvious, but she hadn't realized the extent of their resources or philanthropy. "You never mentioned this," she said, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. Bill smiled. "Tommy doesn't like to brag, but the foundation has done good work." "We try," Tom acknowledged. "And your idea fits perfectly with the Foundation's mission of supporting the Pinecrest community. I think the board would approve funding without hesitation." Elena felt a flutter of excitement mingled with nervousness. "I wouldn't know where to begin, setting up a center like this, I mean. We could consult with similar organizations in Bozeman or Missoula," Tom suggested. "Get input on what services are most needed, and you wouldn't have to do it alone. We could hire staff, bring in volunteers." The project began to take shape over the following weeks. The Miller property, a spacious old Victorian house on the edge of town, was indeed available, and negotiations for its purchase moved forward surprisingly quickly. Elena threw herself into researching similar centers across the country, making lists of necessary resources and envisioning how the spaces could be transformed to serve their new purpose. As her pregnancy progressed, growing more visible by the day, Elena found her energy divided between preparation for the baby and plans for the center. She and Tom had converted one of the cabin's rooms into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and assembling furniture on weekends. Bill had surprised them with a hand-carved wooden cradle, a Blackwell family heirloom that he had painstakingly restored despite the limitations of his post-stroke mobility. The connection between the two projects, the coming baby and the women's center, wasn't lost on Elena. Both represented hope, new beginnings, and the creation of safe spaces in an often uncertain world. Both also required a leap of faith, a willingness to move forward without guarantees. By midsummer, the purchase of the Miller property was complete, and renovation work had begun. The community's response to the project had been overwhelmingly positive, with volunteers offering labor, materials, and expertise. Sheriff Cooper had been particularly supportive, seeing the potential for the center to address issues he had long been concerned about. Ruby had become a regular visitor to the ranch, ostensibly to discuss her upcoming enrollment in night school, but increasingly to volunteer with the center's planning. Away from Martha's influence, she revealed herself to be intelligent and resourceful, with a gift for organization that proved invaluable as they sorted through donations and planned the center's layout. "Martha doesn't know I come here," Ruby confided one afternoon as she and Elena catalogued a donation of textbooks for the center's planned library. "She wouldn't approve." Elena arranged the books by subject, considering her response carefully. "Are you safe, Ruby, in Martha's house?" The young woman's hesitation spoke volumes. "She's not cruel, not physically, but she controls everything. Who I meet, what I wear. She keeps my identification documents locked away for safekeeping." Ruby's fingers formed quotation marks around the phrase. "And the debts keep growing. the cost of my room and board, the clothes she buys for me, even the makeup she insists I wear to meet potential husbands. I'll never be able to repay it all. The arrangement sounded perilously close to indentured servitude, confirming Eleanor's worst suspicions about Martha's operation. That's not legal, Ruby. Withholding your documents, forcing you to accumulate debt. That's a form of trafficking. Ruby's face paled. I never thought of it like that. I just thought, this is how things work in America, that I had to pay my dues. No, Elena said firmly. That's not how things work here. You have rights, even as an immigrant. Sheriff Cooper would want to know about this. But Ruby shook her head quickly. Please don't tell him. Not yet. There are other girls at Martha's, newer arrivals who speak almost no English. If Martha suspects anything, she might move them somewhere else, somewhere worse. The responsibility of this knowledge weighed heavily on Eleanor, but she respected Ruby's request, promising only to help her retrieve her documents and find alternative housing as soon as possible. The conversation reinforced her conviction about the necessity of the Women's Center, a place where women like Ruby could find accurate information and genuine assistance. The summer progressed, each day bringing both the center and Elena's pregnancy closer to fruition. By August, the renovations were nearly complete, transforming the old Victorian into a warm, welcoming space with classrooms, a library, a community kitchen, and private offices for counseling and legal consultations. The grand opening was scheduled for early September, just before Eleanor would begin her teaching position at the high school. As the date approached, however, the simmering tension with Martha Wilson boiled over. The matchmaker had been conspicuously absent from the volunteer efforts, though rumors of her displeasure had circulated through Pinecrest's efficient gossip network. According to Sophia, Martha had been telling clients and potential donors that the center was unnecessary, even harmful, encouraging foreign women to abandon their proper roles and responsibilities. The confrontation finally came on a sweltering afternoon in late August. Elena was at the center, organizing the newly installed bookshelves, when Martha stormed in, her face flushed with anger. "So this is your scheme," she said without preamble, "turning my girls against me." Elena set down the books she was holding, instinctively placing a protective hand over her now prominent baby bump. "This center is for the entire community, Ms. Wilson. No one is targeting you or your business." Martha scoffed. "Don't play innocent. I know Ruby's been sneaking over to your ranch, filling her head with ideas about education and independence. Now she's talking about moving out, getting a job at the diner, as if any decent man would want a bride who smells like grease and coffee." "Perhaps Ruby wants more than to be someone's bride," Elena suggested quietly. "Perhaps she wants to build a life on her own terms. That's not what she came to America for." Martha's voice rose sharply. "These girls sign up for my service, knowing exactly what's expected, a traditional wife for a traditional American man. If they wanted careers, they could have stayed in their own countries." Elena took a deep breath, reminding herself that losing her temper would accomplish nothing. "Women come to America for many reasons, Ms. Wilson. Yes, some are seeking marriage, but all are seeking better lives. This center will help them achieve that goal, however they define it." Martha's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You think you're so superior, don't you? The mail-order bride who struck gold with Tom Blackwell, but don't forget where you came from, Elena. You're just like these other girls, desperate enough to sell yourself to a stranger in a foreign country." The words were meant to wound, to reduce Elena's journey to a crude transaction. But instead of shame, Elena felt a surge of clarity. "You're right that I was desperate when I came here. And yes, I was incredibly fortunate to find Tom. But That's exactly why this center matters, because not every woman is so lucky. Some end up with men who mistreat them. Some, like Ruby, end up indebted to agencies that exploit them. They deserve better options. Options. Martha spat the word like an obscenity. You want to destroy my business, admit it. You've convinced the Blackwells to throw their money and influence behind this recruitment center for feminist ideas. Eleanor shook her head, refusing to be baited. This isn't about your business, Martha. It's about providing resources that should already exist. English classes, legal information, job training. If offering those things threatens your business model, perhaps the problem isn't with the center. For a moment, Martha seemed at a loss for words, her face contorted with fury. Then, with visible effort, she composed herself. This isn't over. Pinecrest has traditions, values. People here won't stand for outside agitators trying to change our way of life. She turned on her heel and stalked out, leaving Elena shaken but resolute. The confrontation had only reinforced her conviction that the center was necessary, not as opposition to marriage or tradition, but as an expansion of possibilities for women who had risked everything for a chance at a better life. That evening, Elena recounted the encounter to Tom as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The beauty of Montana still took her breath away sometimes, a reminder of how far she had come, from the small Ukrainian village where she had begun her journey. Martha Wilson won't give up easily, Tom warned, his arm around her shoulders. She has connections in town, people who depend on her business. Elena leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his steady presence. I know, but so do we, and our cause is just. That it is, Tom agreed softly, and you, Elena Blackwell, are a force to be reckoned with, especially when you're fighting for others. Elena smiled at that, feeling the baby kick as if in agreement. In less than 3 months, she would be a mother. The thought still amazed her that she, who had arrived in Pinecrest with nothing but a suitcase and fading dreams, was now creating both a family and a legacy that would extend beyond herself. "Oh, too old at 30, she murmured. The phrase that had once devastated her now a reminder of how far she had come. Tom's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. Just getting started at 30, he corrected, and Elena knew it was true. This was not an ending but a beginning, for her, for their child, and for the women who would find their own new beginnings at the center. As night settled over Blackwell Ranch, Elena felt the future unfurling before her like a road leading into the distance, unknown but full of promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same courage that had brought her across an ocean to this unlikely home. And she would not face them alone. For a woman once deemed too old at 30, life, it seemed, was just beginning to reveal its most precious gifts. The grand opening of the Pinecrest Women's Resource Center coincided with the first golden leaves of autumn. Elena stood on the porch of the renovated Victorian, surveying the gathered crowd with a mixture of pride and disbelief. 6 months ago, the idea had been nothing more than a whispered possibility. Now it stood manifest in wood and glass, paint and purpose. Sophia Chen squeezed Elena's arm reassuringly. Breathtaking turnout, the doctor murmured. Half the county must be here. Indeed, the lawn of the old Miller property teemed with people, ranchers in their best shirts, teachers from the high school where Elena would soon join the faculty, curious townspeople, and most importantly, a small cluster of women from various countries who had arrived through Martha Wilson's agency or other channels. Ruby stood among them, her face alight with an excitement she made no attempt to disguise. Sheriff James Cooper approached with his wife, extending a hand to Elena. Mrs. Blackwell, this is a fine thing you've done for our community. Long overdue, if you ask me. Thank you, Sheriff. though I can hardly take credit. So many people contributed. Elena gestured toward the building behind her, where volunteers had spent countless hours painting, repairing, and furnishing the spaces that would soon host English classes, legal consultations, and job training workshops. The sheriff nodded, understanding her deflection but not accepting it. Ideas matter, Mrs. Blackwell. The right idea at the right time can change everything. He glanced toward the street, where Martha Wilson stood observing the proceedings. From a careful distance, her expression unreadable. Not everyone sees change as progress, of course. No, Elena agreed quietly, but progress happens nonetheless. Tom appeared at her side, balancing a tray of lemonade glasses with the easy grace that still made her heart skip. At nearly 6 months pregnant, Elena found herself increasingly grateful for his steady presence, the way he anticipated her needs often before she recognized them herself. Almost time for the speeches, he reminded her gently. Dad's in position. Bill Blackwell had insisted on saying a few words at the opening, despite his ongoing struggles with fluent speech. His determination to participate, to publicly associate the Blackwell name with the center, was a gesture whose significance wasn't lost on Elena or the town. As the crowd gathered around the front steps, Elena took her place beside Sophia, who would speak about the health services the center would offer. Bill stood nearby, leaning slightly on his cane, but otherwise projecting the commanding presence that had made him a respected figure in the community long before his stroke. "Welcome," Elena began, her voice stronger than she felt. "Thank you all for coming today to celebrate the opening of the Pinecrest Women's Resource Center. This project began as a dream, not just my dream, but one shared by many in this community who recognized a need and chose to address it." Her eyes swept over the faces before her, lingering briefly on Ruby and the other women who stood together, united by common experiences despite their different nationalities and backgrounds. "America has always been a place of new beginnings," she continued. "Many of us here today, myself included, came to this country seeking opportunity, freedom, and the chance to build a better life. The center exists to support that journey, to provide tools, resources, and community for women, navigating a new culture and new possibilities." Bill spoke next, his carefully practiced words deliberate but powerful. "The Blackwell family has called Pinecrest home for 4 generations. This town gave us everything. This center is our way of giving back, to ensure that everyone who comes here finds the welcome and support they deserve." As the speeches concluded and ribbon-cutting commenced, Elena noticed Martha Wilson slipping away, her rigid posture conveying disapproval more eloquently than words. The matchmaker's opposition had grown more organized. In recent weeks, whispered concerns about foreign influences and undermining traditional values, subtle pressure on local businesses to withhold support. Yet for every step back, the center seemed to take 2 forward. Anonymous donations appeared, volunteers emerged from unexpected quarters, and most importantly, women began to come, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The day passed in a blur of introductions, tours, and heartfelt conversations. By evening, when the last guests had departed and only the core volunteers remained to clean up, Elena felt a bone-deep exhaustion tempered by profound satisfaction. This place would make a difference. She could feel it in the energy that already seemed to permeate the renovated rooms. "Quite a day," Tom observed as they drove back to the ranch, the truck's headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. "You should be proud." Elena smiled, her hand resting on the swell of her belly where their child grew steadily stronger. "I am. Though I keep thinking about Martha. Her anger seems disproportionate. Martha Wilson has built her life and livelihood on a very specific vision of what women should be," Tom said thoughtfully. "The center challenges that vision simply by existing. It's not just about competition for clients, it's about competing worldviews. Elena nodded, considering this perspective. Still, I wish there was some way to make her understand we're not enemies. The women who come to her agency might still choose marriage, but they should do so from a position of knowledge and freedom, not desperation or ignorance. Some people don't want informed choices, Tom reminded her gently. They prefer compliance. Makes things simpler. The conversation lingered in Elena's mind that night as she prepared for bed, moving through the now familiar routine with the awkward care her advancing pregnancy required. Tom was right about Martha, she suspected. The matchmaker's business model depended on a certain kind of vulnerability, a power imbalance between the women she recruited and the men who paid for introductions. Still, Elena couldn't quite silence the small voice that suggested there might be common ground somewhere, a way forward that didn't cast Martha as an enemy, but as a potential, if reluctant, ally. The idea seemed naive even as it formed, yet it persisted. The first frost arrived early that year, crisping the grass overnight and painting delicate patterns on the cabin windows. Elena woke to find Tom already gone, called away before dawn to help with a difficult carving in the north pasture. Pregnancy had made her a lighter sleeper, more attuned to the subtle shifts in the bed as he rose, the careful way he closed the door to let her rest. She dressed warmly and made her way to the main house for breakfast with Bill, a routine they had established during her early months on the ranch and maintained even after her marriage to Tom. These quiet morning conversations had become precious. To them both, a space where Bill could practice his improving speech without self-consciousness, and Elena could absorb the rich history of the Blackwells and their land. Ruby called last night, Bill informed her, as they shared coffee, regular for him, herbal tea for her, and freshly baked bread. After you'd gone to bed. Elena looked up in surprise. Is everything all right? Bill's expression was grave. Martha found out about her night school registration, threatened to send her back to Russia. She can't do that, Elena protested immediately. Ruby has a valid visa. Martha has no legal authority over her movements. Said she'd report. Visa violation. Said Ruby broke contract terms. Bill's frustration with the limitations of his speech was evident as he struggled to convey the urgency of the situation. Ruby's afraid, believes her. Elena felt her chest tighten with anger. Martha's tactics were becoming increasingly aggressive, not just spreading rumors or discouraging women from visiting the center, but actively threatening those who sought independence. Where is Ruby now? Still at Martha's, but packed a bag, ready to leave. Elena pushed herself up from the table with sudden determination. I'll go get her. Today. Bill's weathered hand covered hers, his touch cautionary. Martha won't give up easily. Needs to be legal, careful. He was right, of course. Rushing in without preparation could make the situation worse, potentially putting Ruby in a more vulnerable position. I'll call Sheriff Cooper first, Elena conceded. Get his advice. The sheriff arrived at the ranch an hour later, his expression serious as Elena and Bill explained the situation. He listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small notebook he carried. Martha's operating in a gray area, he acknowledged when they had finished. The matchmaking business itself isn't illegal, but some of her practices, holding documents, creating artificial debt, restrictions on movement, those cross lines. The challenge is evidence and jurisdiction. Immigration matters technically fall to federal authorities. So there's nothing you can do. Elena couldn't keep the disappointment from her voice. Sheriff Cooper closed his notebook deliberately. I didn't say that. I can certainly accompany you to retrieve Ruby if she wants to leave. Make sure things don't escalate. And if Martha physically attempts to prevent Ruby from leaving or refuses to return her documents, that becomes a clear local crime I can address. Relief washed over Elena. When can we go? No time like the present, the sheriff replied, standing. But Mrs. Blackwell, this needs to be Ruby's decision. We can create a safe path for her, but she has to walk it herself. Elena nodded. Understanding. I know, I just want her to have the choice. They agreed that Elena would call Ruby first, confirming her desire to leave and arranging a time when Martha was likely to be home. The confrontation couldn't be avoided. Better to have it directly with the sheriff present than to attempt a secretive departure that would only fuel Martha's narrative about the center stealing her girls. Ruby answered on the first ring, her voice tense with suppressed emotion. Elena? Is that you? Yes. Bill told me what happened. Are you all right? A shaky exhale. I'm okay, scared, but okay. Martha was so angry when she found my registration papers, said I was betraying her after everything she'd done for me, that no man would want a wife who puts education above her duties. Elena closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself against the familiar rhetoric. Ruby, listen to me. You have every right to pursue education. Martha has no legal authority to stop you or send you back to Russia. Sheriff Cooper and I want to come help you leave, if that's what you want. The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, Ruby spoke, her voice stronger. Yes, that's what I want. I've been afraid to leave on my own, Martha says. She says I owe her nearly $5,000 for room, board, clothes, everything since I arrived. I don't have that kind of money. You don't need it, Elena assured her firmly. Those charges are improper, possibly illegal. The sheriff will explain everything. Can you be ready in an hour? And is Martha home? Yes to both. She's interviewing a new girl who arrived yesterday, Vietnamese, I think. Barely speaks English. The new information added urgency to the situation. If Martha was already processing another vulnerable young woman, intervening quickly became even more important. We'll be there soon, Elena promised. Pack only what's essential. We can come back for the rest later if necessary. After ending the call, Elena filled Sheriff Cooper in on the additional details. His expression darkened at the mention of a new arrival. This may be bigger than just Ruby's situation. If Martha's bringing in women who don't speak English, isolating them, creating artificial debt, that starts looking like trafficking, not matchmaking. The drive into town was tense, the sheriff following in his patrol car, while Elena rehearsed what she would say to Martha. By the time they pulled up in front of the large Victorian house that served as both Martha's residence and the headquarters of her matchmaking agency, Elena felt as prepared as possible for the confrontation ahead. Martha answered the door herself, her expression shifting from professional welcome to cold hostility as she registered Elena and the sheriff standing on her porch. Mrs. Blackwell, Sheriff Cooper, to what do I owe this unexpected visit? Sheriff Cooper stepped forward, maintaining a careful professional distance. Ms. Wilson, we're here to assist Ruby Sanchez in relocating her residence. She's indicated she wishes to leave your establishment. Martha's face hardened. Ruby is welcome to leave anytime she chooses, of course, once her financial obligations to my agency are settled. The contract she signed is quite clear about the terms. I'd like to see that contract, the sheriff said mildly, and any documentation regarding these alleged debts. Of course, please come in. Martha's tone remained rigidly polite as she led them into a formal sitting room where Ruby waited, a single suitcase at her feet. The young woman looked pale but determined, straightening her shoulders as Elena entered. Also present was a girl who couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, with delicate features and long black hair. She sat perfectly still in an armchair, hands folded in her lap, eyes downcast. The new arrival from Vietnam, Elena assumed. Martha retrieved a folder from a desk in the corner, handing it to Sheriff Cooper with a tight smile. "Everything is in order, I assure you." Ruby signed a contract agreeing to reimburse the agency for all expenses related to her placement, including travel, accommodation, clothing, and grooming appropriate for introductions to potential spouses. While the sheriff reviewed the documents, Elena moved to sit beside Ruby, offering silent support. The Vietnamese girl watched them from beneath lowered lashes, her expression carefully neutral, but her attention unmistakably focused on the unfolding scene. "Ms. Wilson," Sheriff Cooper finally said, looking up from the papers, "several of these charges appear improper, charging interest on room and board, mandatory fees for clothing selected by you rather than Miss Sanchez. These terms are potentially unenforceable." Martha's smile didn't waver. "The contract was reviewed by my attorney, Sheriff. Everything is legal." "Legal is a matter for the courts to decide," he countered evenly. "But regardless, Miss Sanchez has the right to leave your residence. Any financial disputes can be addressed separately." Martha's composure slipped slightly. She also has obligations to potential clients. Men who have paid good money to meet her. What am I supposed to tell them? "That's a business matter between you and your clients," the sheriff replied. "Now, Miss Sanchez will need her personal documents, passport, visa, any identification you may be holding for safekeeping." A tense silence followed as Martha visibly calculated her options. Elena could almost see the woman's thoughts flickering behind her carefully controlled expression: resistance versus compliance, the potential consequences of either choice. Finally, Martha moved to a small safe concealed behind a painting, her movements deliberately unhurried. "As you wish, though I maintain that Ruby is making a grave mistake. The opportunities I provide are unique. Not every woman is suited for independence in a foreign country." She withdrew a manila envelope and handed it to Ruby without meeting her eyes. "Your documents. I hope you realize what you're giving up." Ruby accepted the envelope with steady hands. "I know exactly what I'm giving up and what I'm gaining." As they prepared to leave, Elena noticed the Vietnamese girl watching them with an intensity that belied her outwardly passive demeanor. On impulse, Elena approached her, speaking softly. "My name is Elena. I run the Women's Resource Center in town. If you ever need help or just someone to talk to, you're always welcome there." She slipped a small card with the center's address and phone number into the girl's hand, careful to ensure Martha didn't notice the exchange. The girl gave no indication of having understood, but her fingers closed around the card, concealing it in a swift, practiced motion that suggested complete comprehension. Outside, Ruby exhaled a shuddering breath as they walked to the vehicles. "I didn't think it would be that easy." "Sheriff Cooper's presence made the difference," Elena acknowledged, glancing back at Martha's house. "I'm worried about the new girl and any others who might still be there." The sheriff nodded grimly. "So am I. This warrants further investigation. I'll be making some calls to immigration officials, seeing what can be done." He turned to Ruby. "In the meantime, Miss Sanchez, do you have somewhere to stay?" "She'll stay with us at the ranch," Elena said without hesitation. "We have plenty of room." Ruby's eyes widened. "Are you sure I don't want to impose?" "Completely sure," Elena assured her. "The cabin has a comfortable sofa bed, and you'd be doing me a favor. Tom's been concerned about me being alone during the day when my pregnancy progresses further." The arrangement settled, they parted ways with Sheriff Cooper, promising to keep them informed of any developments regarding Martha's operation. The drive back to the ranch was lighter, Ruby visibly relaxing with each mile that separated her from Martha's house. "I can't believe I did it," she said wonderingly. "I've been so afraid for so long. Afraid of being sent back, afraid of being alone, afraid of making the wrong choice." Elena smiled, recognizing the sentiment all too well. The first step is always the hardest, but you're not alone now. That's what the center is for, making sure no one has to navigate this journey without support. Tom was waiting when they arrived at the ranch, having returned from the calving to find Elena gone and Bill's explanation of the situation. His relief at seeing her was evident in the way he immediately moved to help her from the truck, his hands lingering protectively over her rounded belly. "Everything okay?" he asked, his question encompassing both the confrontation with Martha and Elena's well-being. "Better than okay," Elena confirmed, leaning into his steadying embrace. "Ruby's coming to stay with us for a while. I hope that's all right." Tom's gaze shifted to Ruby, who stood uncertainly beside the truck, clutching her suitcase. His smile was warm and genuine. "More than all right. Welcome to Blackwell Ranch, Ruby. Consider it your home for as long as you need." The days that followed established a new rhythm to ranch life. Ruby proved to be a quick learner and willing helper, taking on household tasks that had become increasingly difficult for Elena as her pregnancy advanced. In return, Elena helped Ruby prepare for the high school equivalency exams, their study sessions often extending into wide-ranging discussions about literature, history, and Ruby's growing aspirations. "I think I'd like to become a teacher," Ruby confided one evening as they sat on the cabin's porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in fiery hues. "Like you, I never considered it before. Education wasn't valued for girls in my village. Just getting through elementary school was an achievement." Elena nodded, understanding. "Teaching is a special calling. You'd be wonderful at it. You have patience and genuine curiosity, two essential qualities." "Do you think it's possible? For someone like me, I mean." The uncertainty in Ruby's voice tugged at Elena's heart. "Of course it's possible. The path might be longer because you're starting with your high school completion, but that just means you'll appreciate the achievement even more." Ruby seemed to consider this, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "When I came to America, all I wanted was security. A husband, a home, maybe children someday. Martha made it seem like that was the only option for women like me, trading youth and obedience for stability. There's nothing wrong with wanting those things," Elena pointed out gently. "Marriage and family can be beautiful, but they should be choices made from a position of strength and self-knowledge, not desperation." "Like you and Tom," Ruby observed with a small smile. "You chose each other as equals." Elena returned the smile, touched by the younger woman's perception. "We did, though it took us both by surprise." As September melded into October, the center continued to flourish, expanding its programs in response to community needs. The English classes proved particularly popular, drawing not only immigrant women, but also several local ranchers' wives who had married into the community from various countries and welcomed the opportunity to improve their skills in a supportive environment. Sheriff Cooper made good on his promise to investigate Martha's operation, bringing in federal authorities who specialized in immigration issues. The process moved slowly, hampered by jurisdictional complexities and the reluctance of many women to come forward, but progress was evident in the increasingly defensive tone of Martha's public statements and the subtle exodus of women from her agency. Elena split her time between the ranch and the center, balancing her advancing pregnancy with her commitment to the project she had helped create. The high school had been understanding about her delayed start date, agreeing that she could begin teaching in the spring semester after the baby's arrival and an appropriate maternity leave. The first snow of the season dusted Pinecrest in late October, transforming the landscape into a glittering wonderland that took Elena's breath away. Standing at the cabin window early one morning, watching the sunrise illuminate the white-coated mountains, she felt a profound sense of rightness, as if all the twists and turns of her journey had been leading inexorably to this place, this moment this life she was building. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her reverie. Unusual for this hour, especially in weather that had most of the ranch's residents seeking the warmth of their beds for every possible minute. Tom had left before dawn to check on the pregnant heifers in the barn, and Bill rarely ventured out before breakfast. Elena opened the door to find Sheriff Cooper standing on her porch, his expression grave beneath the brim of his snow-dusted hat. "Mrs. Blackwell, sorry to disturb you so early." "Not at all," she said, stepping back to invite him in. "Is everything all right?" The sheriff removed his hat, brushing snow from its brim as he entered. "There's been a development regarding Martha Wilson's operation. I thought you'd want to know immediately." Elena gestured toward the kitchen. "Please, sit. Would you like coffee?" "Thank you. No." Despite his refusal, the sheriff took a seat at the small kitchen table. "Federal agents conducted a raid on Martha's property yesterday evening based on information we've been gathering. They found evidence confirming our suspicions. Financial records showing systematic exploitation, communications with questionable overseas recruiters, and most significantly, 3 women being held in conditions that could only be described as captivity." Eleanor sank into a chair across from him, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as the baby shifted restlessly. "Captivity? You mean they were being prevented from leaving?" "Worse than that," Cooper said grimly. "These women had been told they were coming to America for legitimate jobs, as nannies or housekeepers. They had no idea they were being marketed as potential brides. When they objected, Martha apparently confiscated their documents and informed them they would be reported as illegal immigrants if they didn't cooperate. They were being kept in converted rooms in the basement, allowed upstairs only for training and supervised meetings with clients." The horror of the situation struck Elena like a physical blow. She had suspected Martha's methods were unethical, perhaps even borderline illegal, but this level of exploitation exceeded her worst imaginings. "Those poor women, are they safe now?" The sheriff nodded. "They're being cared for. The federal agents have translators working with them, documenting their experiences. Martha has been arrested on multiple charges: fraud, unlawful imprisonment, labor trafficking. The investigation is ongoing, but given the evidence already uncovered, it's likely she'll face significant prison time." Relief mingled with sadness as Elena processed the news. "I knew she was desperate to maintain control, but I never imagined she'd go to such extremes." "People who build their lives on power over others rarely surrender that power willingly," Cooper observed. The warning signs were there: Ruby's experience, the reports from other women who'd passed through Martha's agency. We just didn't have enough to act until now. After the sheriff departed, promising to keep Elena informed as the case progressed, she sat alone in the quiet kitchen, trying to reconcile her complicated feelings about Martha's downfall. There was no satisfaction in the woman's disgrace, only a profound sadness that she had chosen exploitation over adaptation, control over compassion. Tom found her still at the table when he returned from the barn, cheeks ruddy from the cold and bearing the news that one of the heifers had delivered a healthy calf in the night. His jubilation faded as he registered Eleanor's expression. "What's happened?" he asked, immediately crossing to her side. Elena recounted the sheriff's visit and Martha's arrest, watching as Tom's expression shifted from concern to grim understanding. "The center becomes even more important now," she concluded. "With Martha's operation shut down, there will be women in the community who need support more than ever. Not just the victims from the basement, but all the others who came through her agency over the years." Tom nodded slowly. "We'll make sure they get it. The Blackwell Foundation can increase its support if necessary. Additional staff, expanded programs, whatever's needed." His automatic inclusion of her in the Foundation's decision-making, the casual we that acknowledged her full partnership in all aspects of their shared life, warmed Elena despite the somber circumstances. This was what true security felt like, she realized. Not dependence or submission, but mutual respect and shared purpose. News of Martha's arrest spread through Pinecrest with the efficiency of a small town's gossip network. By mid-morning, the center's phone rang constantly with calls from concerned citizens, women seeking information about friends or relatives who had been connected to the matchmaking agency, and volunteers offering additional support. Elena coordinated from home, while Sophia took charge at the center itself, her medical expertise particularly valuable for the women rescued from Martha's basement. Ruby was among the first to arrive at the cabin, her face flushed from the cold, and her expression a complicated mixture of vindication and distress. "I just heard," she said without preamble. "I can't believe it. I mean, I can believe it, but basement rooms? Actual imprisonment? It's horrifying." Elena ushered her inside, noting the tension in the younger woman's movements. "You couldn't have known, Ruby. None of us knew the full extent." "But I lived there for months," Ruby protested, pacing the small living room. "I should have noticed something. Strange noises, unusual restrictions about certain areas of the house, anything." "Martha was careful," Elena pointed out gently, "and you were focused on your own survival. That's natural." Ruby stopped pacing, turning to face Elena with sudden resolve. "I want to help them. The women who were rescued. I speak Russian and some Ukrainian. I could translate or just be there. Someone who understands what it's like to be in a strange country, dependent on others." The offer didn't surprise Elena. In the weeks since leaving Martha's, Ruby had revealed a deep well of compassion beneath her initially reserved exterior. "I think that would be incredibly valuable." Sheriff Cooper mentioned they're working with translators, but having someone who's been through a similar experience, even if not as extreme, that could make all the difference. As the day progressed, the full impact of Martha's arrest rippled through the community. The center quickly established itself as a central hub for information and support, coordinating with federal authorities to ensure the rescued women received appropriate care while respecting their privacy and dignity. Plans were made to expand the center's housing assistance program, creating safe temporary accommodations for women in transition. Elena found herself at the heart of these efforts despite her physical distance from the center. Her phone rarely, silent, as she fielded calls, offered guidance, and connected resources. By evening, exhaustion had settled deep in her bones, but alongside it was a profound sense of purpose. This was exactly why the center existed, to be a safety net when other systems failed, to provide pathways forward for women facing seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Tom insisted she rest after dinner, drawing her a warm bath and taking over the still ringing phone. Through the bathroom door, she could hear his steady voice answering questions, offering reassurance, directing callers to appropriate resources. His unwavering support, not just for her personally, but for the work she felt called to do, reinforced her certainty that despite all the difficulties of her journey to America, she had ultimately arrived exactly where she belonged. As she eased her increasingly unwieldy body into the soothing water, Elena found her thoughts turning to the future. The baby would arrive in less than 2 months. The center was evolving rapidly in response to community needs. Her teaching position awaited her in the spring. Life stretched before her, rich with possibility and purpose. She thought of the frightened, uncertain woman who had stepped off the bus in Pinecrest less than a year ago, clutching a worn suitcase and fading dreams. How astonished that woman would be to glimpse her future self, not defined by her marriage or her age or her nationality, but by the life she was actively creating, the community she was helping to build. the legacy she was establishing for. Her child, too old at 30, Martha had declared dismissively on that first devastating day. Now, as Elena rested her hands on her rounded belly and felt her child's vigorous movements beneath her palms, the phrase seemed not just wrong, but absurd. She wasn't too old for anything. She was exactly the right age, with the perfect blend of youthful energy and hard-won wisdom to build the life she truly wanted. The coming days would bring challenges. Martha's case would proceed through the legal system. The rescued women would begin their long journey toward healing. The center would continue to evolve to meet emerging needs. But Elena faced these prospects with a serene confidence that had been unimaginable to her former self. Sometimes the darkest moments truly did precede the brightest dawns. Sometimes rejection led to redirection toward one's true path. And sometimes being deemed too old at 30 was the unexpected gift that opened the door to one's richest, most authentic life. Spring arrived in Pinecrest with a symphony of renewal. Snowmelt rushing in streams, tender green shoots pushing through thawing earth, birds returning to nest in the ranch's ancient cottonwoods. Catherine, now 5 months old, observed this transformation from her perch in Elena's arms, dark eyes wide with wonder at each new discovery. The morning light streamed through the cabin windows as Elena prepared for her first day back at the center since Catherine's birth. Though she had remained involved through phone calls and occasional visits, today marked her official return to active participation, a milestone she approached with both excitement and trepidation. "Are you sure you're ready?" Tom asked, watching, as she gathered her things, while Catherine contentedly explored a wooden rattle Bill had carved. "There's no rush. The center's running smoothly with Ruby and Sophia managing things." Elena smiled, touched by his concern but certain of her decision. "I'm ready. Catherine will be fine with Bill for a few hours, and I need this to reconnect with the work, to feel purposeful beyond motherhood, as wonderful as that is." Tom nodded, understanding, pulling her into a gentle embrace that included their daughter between them. "The Blackwell women, off to change the world," he murmured against her hair. "Dad and I don't stand a chance, do we, Katya?" The baby gurgled in apparent agreement, reaching up to pat Tom's stubbled cheek with a chubby hand. The drive into town offered Elena a quiet moment of reflection. The past 5 months had been a cocoon of sorts, focused almost exclusively on Catherine's needs, the rhythm of days dictated by feedings, naps, and the countless small revelations of new parenthood. Precious time, irreplaceable. Yet she had missed the center, the sense of larger purpose it provided, the community she had helped build. The expanded facility, now encompassing both the original Victorian and the neighboring Miller property, came into view as she rounded the final bend. The fresh paint and new signage struck Elena with a wave of pride. What had begun as a desperate improvisation on that first day in the cafe, when Martha Wilson had dismissed her as too old, had blossomed into something substantial and enduring. Ruby met her at the door, clipboard in hand and a broad smile lighting her face. "Welcome back. Catherine's not with you?" "With Bill," Elena explained, following Ruby inside. "They have a standing morning date now. He reads to her while I express milk for later. She seems to prefer Hemingway, oddly enough. Falls asleep to The Old Man and the Sea every time." Ruby laughed. "Literary tastes start early in the Blackwell family, apparently." The center hummed with activity, an English class in progress. In one room, a resume workshop in another. The computer lab fully occupied with women of various ages improving their digital skills. In the newest space, created during the expansion, Mei Lin sat at an industrial sewing machine, demonstrating techniques to 3 attentive students. "May's alterations business is taking off," Ruby reported, following Eleanor's gaze. "She's already hired 2 women from the center and has more work than they can handle." The Western Wear store in Bozeman wants her to create custom embroidery for their rodeo collection. Elena watched as May guided a length of denim under the needle with confident precision. The transformation from the frightened woman they had met at Thanksgiving to this poised entrepreneur was remarkable, a testament to resilience and to the power of community support. "And the legal cases? Any updates?" Elena asked as they continued their tour. Ruby's expression turned serious. "Martha's trial is set for July. The prosecutor says the evidence is overwhelming. She'll likely accept a plea deal rather than face a jury. Several more women have come forward since the arrest, some from years ago. The pattern goes back at least a decade." The news landed heavily, a reminder of how many lives had been affected by Martha's exploitation. And the agency? Has it been shut down completely? "The federal authorities closed it," Ruby confirmed. "But there's been an interesting development. Besides, I've done my research on your center, Mrs. Blackwell. The work you're doing matters. Martha focused on making matches. You're focused on making lives better. I believe these files will be safer and more useful in your hands than anywhere else." With that, she departed, leaving Elena staring at the envelope with its potential to illuminate both past injustices and future opportunities. The following months brought a steady rhythm of growth and transformation, both for the center and for Elena personally. The scholarship program launched successfully, with Ruby among its first recipients. Her determination to become a teacher, now supported by practical resources and professional mentorship. May's alterations business expanded into a proper storefront on Main Street, employing 5 women from the center and offering apprenticeships to others interested in learning the trade. Martha Wilson's trial proceeded swiftly, culminating in a plea agreement that sent her to federal prison for 15 years. The news brought Elena no satisfaction, only a complex mixture of relief that the exploitation had ended and sadness for a woman whose talents and energy might have been directed toward building rather than diminishing lives. The files Caroline had provided proved invaluable, just as she had predicted, with careful protocols established by the board to protect privacy and prioritize ethical use. The center began the delicate process of reaching out to women who had passed through Martha's agency over the years. Some declined contact, having built lives they preferred to keep separate from their origins. But many responded with gratitude, eager for connection to a supportive community that understood their unique journeys. Fall arrived with its paintbrush of gold and crimson, transforming the Montana landscape into a canvas of spectacular beauty. Catherine, now approaching her first birthday, took her first tentative steps across the cabin floor, arms outstretched toward Eleanor in a moment of triumph and determination that brought tears to her mother's eyes. "She has your persistence," Tom observed, capturing the milestone on camera, "that Petrovich determination." "And those Blackwell blue eyes," Elena countered, gathering their daughter into a celebratory embrace. "A perfect combination." The Eye Center marked its 1-year anniversary with a community celebration that filled both buildings and spilled onto the surrounding grounds. Tables laden with international cuisine, music representing diverse cultures, children playing games from various traditions, all testified to Pinecrest's evolution into a more cosmopolitan community while maintaining its essential character and values. Sheriff Cooper, a steadfast supporter since the center's inception, found Elena amid the festivities. "Remarkable what you've accomplished in a year," he noted, surveying the diverse gathering with evident satisfaction. "Changed the entire character of the town, and for the better." Elena shook her head, deflecting credit that felt too singular for such a collaborative achievement. The town was ready for change. The center just provided a framework for what was already beginning to happen. Cooper smiled knowingly, Humble as always, Mrs. Blackwell. But catalysts matter. The right person at the right moment can accelerate transformation that might otherwise take decades. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and volunteers handled the cleanup, Elena found herself standing on the center's porch with Ruby, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. In the distance, the mountains stood silhouetted against the last remnants of sunset, eternal and unchanging amid the human dramas unfolding at their feet. "I registered for my first education classes today," Ruby announced quietly. "Starting in January, the scholarship makes it possible." Elena turned to her with genuine delight. "Ruby, that's wonderful news. Elementary education." Ruby nodded, her expression a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "4 years to my degree. Seems like forever." "It will pass more quickly than you imagine," Elena assured her, "and you'll be a remarkable teacher. Your journey gives you insight most educators never develop." Ruby's smile was thoughtful. "That's what I hope. To use everything, even the hard parts, to help others find their way." She glanced at Eleanor with sudden intensity. "You know, that first day at Martha's, when you and Tom came to help me leave, I was terrified, not just of Martha, but of the future. What would happen to me without the structure she provided, controlling as it was?" "I remember," Elena acknowledged softly. "You were so brave, stepping into uncertainty." "I wasn't brave," Ruby contradicted gently. "I was desperate. But watching you, how you had created a completely different life than the one Martha prescribed, how you moved through the world with purpose rather than fear, it made me believe I could do it too. That there were alternatives to the narrow path I'd been shown." The confession touched Elena deeply, a reminder that transformation rarely occurs in isolation. Each life intersects with countless others, creating ripples of influence that extend far beyond what any individual can measure or predict. "We help each other forward," she said simply. "That's how communities work at their best." As winter settled once more over Pinecrest, bringing with it Catherine's first birthday and the holiday season, Elena found herself increasingly drawn to writing. Reflective essays about her experiences, practical guides for navigating immigration challenges, stories that illuminated the journey from isolation to connection. What began as personal reflection evolved into articles for local publications, then submissions to national magazines focused on women's issues and immigrant experiences. "You should compile these into a book," Tom suggested one evening as he read her latest piece, a nuanced exploration of how communities could balance tradition and evolution in an increasingly globalized world. "There's a cohesive vision here, a perspective that deserves wider audience." The suggestion both thrilled and intimidated Elena. "A book? That seems presumptuous somehow. I'm not an expert, just someone processing my own experiences." "The most valuable insights often come from exactly that place," Tom countered. "Not detached expertise, but lived experience thoughtfully examined." He set the pages aside, regarding her with the steady gaze that had first captured her attention in the Golden Horseshoe Cafe nearly 2 years earlier. "Your words matter, Elena. They're already helping women in Pinecrest. Why not extend that reach?" On Catherine's first birthday, celebrated with a small gathering at the ranch, Elena received an unexpected gift from Bill, a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "For the book," he explained with a knowing smile. "Your story matters." That night, after Catherine had been tucked into bed surrounded by new toys and the last guests had departed, Eleanor sat at her small desk by the cabin window. Outside, snow fell in fat, lazy flakes, illuminated by the porch light into individual crystals of perfect ephemeral beauty. Inside, the warmth of the fire and the quiet breathing of her sleeping family created a cocoon of security and peace. She opened the journal to its first blank page, poised her pen above the pristine surface, and began to write. I was 30 years old when I arrived in America, carrying a single suitcase and the weight of expectations that weren't my own. Too old, they said. Too set in your ways. Words meant to diminish, to constrain, to define limitations rather than possibilities. What I discovered instead was that 30 isn't old at all. It's just old enough to know your own worth when others fail to recognize it. Just old enough to build something meaningful from the rubble of shattered expectations. Just old enough to understand that security comes not from surrendering agency, but from claiming it fully, surrounded by a community that values contribution over compliance. The words flowed with surprising ease, carrying Elena back to that first day in Pinecrest. The fear, the uncertainty, the crushing blow of Martha Wilson's assessment. But now these memories were tempered by all that had followed. The unexpected opportunity at Blackwell Ranch, the gradual blossoming of love with Tom, the creation of the center, the birth of Catherine, the countless lives touched and transformed along the way. In the quiet of the cabin, with her sleeping child and husband just rooms away, Elena Blackwell continued writing long into the night, giving shape to a narrative that honored both where she had begun and where she now stood. A woman no longer defined by others' limitations, but by her own expanding sense of what was possible. Too old at 30, the phrase that had once cut so deeply now elicited only a smile of knowing wisdom. Life didn't end at 30 or 40 or beyond. It continuously renewed itself through choice, connection, and the courage to recognize opportunity, even when it arrived in the guise of rejection. Outside, snow continued to fall, each unique crystal adding to the transforming landscape. Inside, words continued to flow, each sentence adding to a story that, like Elena herself, refused to be limited by others' definitions or constrained by artificial boundaries. In Pinecrest, Montana, a town remade through the courage and vision of its newest citizens, a woman once dismissed as too old at 30 was just beginning to discover the full measure of what she might become. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. If Stephen had abandoned their arrangement, she would need to find work quickly. Her remaining funds wouldn't last more than a week at the inn. The cafe was warm and smelled of cinnamon and coffee. A few early risers occupied tables, an elderly couple sharing toast, a man in a business suit reading a newspaper, and in the corner, a man in a rancher's hat studying paperwork while absently stirring his coffee. The waitress, a friendly woman with a name tag reading Betty, approached as Elena took a seat at the counter. "What can I get you, honey? You're new in town, aren't you?" Elena nodded. "Yes, coffee please. Black." "Coming right up." Betty poured the coffee, then leaned slightly over the counter. "Passing through or staying a while?" I am not sure yet." Eleanor wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "I need work. Are there jobs in Pinecrest?" Betty considered this. "Depends on what you can do. The school might need a substitute teacher. The clinic's always shorthanded. What's your experience?" "I was teacher in Ukraine, literature and some English." Betty's eyes brightened. "Well, that's something. You should talk to Principal Davis over at the elementary school." And she lowered her voice slightly. "If that doesn't pan out, the Blackwell Ranch usually hires extra help during calving season. Not teaching, of course, but they pay well and provide housing." From the corner, the man in the rancher's hat looked up briefly at the mention of Blackwell Ranch. Elena caught his glance, steady blue eyes under the brim of his hat before he returned to his paperwork. "Thank you," Elena said sincerely. "I will try school first." As Elena sipped her coffee, the bell above the door jingled, and Martha Wilson entered with Ruby in tow. Martha's face registered surprise at seeing Elena, quickly masked with a tight smile. "Elena, I was just coming to find you. We have a potential match to discuss. Martha slid into the seat beside Elena, lowering her voice. There's a widower in the next county. 67, owns a small hardware store. No children, but he's financially stable. He's expressed interest in meeting you. Elena felt her stomach tighten. 67? Martha's smile didn't reach her eyes. Beggars can't be choosers, dear. At your age, you should consider yourself fortunate that... Excuse me. The deep voice came from behind them. The man in the rancher's hat had approached so quietly neither had noticed. I couldn't help overhearing. Are you from the matchmaking agency? Martha's demeanor transformed instantly, professional charm replacing condescension. Yes, Martha. Wilson Marriage Bureau. Are you interested in our services, Mr. Blackwell, Tom Blackwell? He extended a hand, which Martha eagerly shook. His attention, however, remained on Elena. And you are? Elena Petrovich, she answered, struck by the directness of his gaze. Martha practically vibrated with excitement. The Blackwells were one of the wealthiest families in the county, owners of a sprawling cattle ranch that had been in their family for generations. Tom was the heir to it all, and apparently single. Mr. Blackwell, what a pleasure. If you're interested in meeting potential brides, I have several lovely candidates. She gestured toward Ruby, who smiled prettily on cue. Ruby just arrived from Russia, 22, excellent homemaking skills, and comes from a good family. Tom Blackwell didn't even glance at Ruby. His eyes remained on Elena. And Ms. Petrovich? Is she also available through your agency? Martha's smile faltered slightly. Well, yes, technically, although... She lowered her voice. Elena is 30. Most of our clients prefer younger matches. Something flickered in Tom's expression. Not disappointment, but a spark of what looked almost like amusement. 30? Practically ancient. The dry delivery made it clear he was mocking Martha's perspective. He turned to Elena. Miss Petrovich, I heard you mention you were a teacher. What subjects? Confused by this turn of events, Elena answered carefully. Literature, primarily. Some English as second language. In Ukraine, I taught at village school for 8 years. Tom nodded thoughtfully. My father had a stroke last year. His mind is sharp as ever, but his speech is affected. He's been trying to regain his reading abilities. The therapist from the city comes only once a month. We've been looking for someone who could work with him more regularly. Martha interjected eagerly. Ruby has experience with children. I'm sure she could... I need someone with teaching experience. Tom cut her off politely but firmly. Someone patient, mature, who understands that learning can be frustrating. For adults. He addressed Elena directly. Would you be interested in meeting my father? If you two get along, it could be a position with room and board included. Elena felt hope flare for the first time since arriving in Pinecrest. I would be very interested, Mr. Blackwell. Martha looked stricken, but Mr. Mail-order bride called too old at 30. The next morning, a wealthy rancher proposed marriage. Hope shimmers most brilliantly in the darkest moments. When Elena Petrovich stepped off the bus in Pinecrest, Montana, clutching nothing but a weathered suitcase and fading dreams, she had no idea that the words meant to break her would become the foundation of her greatest happiness. The autumn wind whipped through Elena's dark hair as she stood at the Pinecrest bus depot. At 30 years old, she had left behind everything familiar in Ukraine to start anew in America. The matchmaking agency had promised her a chance at love, security, and perhaps even happiness. 3 things that had eluded her in her homeland. Her fingers traced the worn photograph in her pocket, the image of the man she was supposed to meet. A local farmer named Stephen Mills, who had paid the agency handsomely for a traditional bride who would appreciate the simple life he offered. Eleanor had spent her life savings on this journey. Teaching literature at a small school in her village had barely paid the bills, and after her parents' passing last year, there had been nothing left to keep her there. No family, no prospects for marriage in a place where women typically wed. By 25, when she found the advertisement for American men seeking brides, it seemed like fate, a last chance. The depot was emptier than she expected. Just a small wooden building with peeling paint and a lone clerk behind the counter who barely glanced up when she approached. "Excuse me," she said, her English careful and practiced. "I am looking for someone. Stephen Mills. He was to meet." "Me here?" The clerk, an older man with weathered skin and kind eyes, shook his head. "No Stephen today, ma'am. You're the only arrival on this bus." Confusion settled over Elena like a heavy cloak. She checked her watch, an old family heirloom, the only valuable thing she owned. She was on time. Perhaps Stephen was late? She decided to wait, settling onto a hard wooden bench outside the depot, her suitcase at her feet. Minutes stretched into an hour, and still no Stephen. As dusk approached, Elena felt the first tremors of real fear. She was alone in a strange country, in a town she knew nothing about, with limited funds and nowhere to go. Just as she was considering her increasingly desperate options, a black sedan pulled up and a woman in her 50s emerged. Her tailored suit and perfectly coiffed hair seemed out of place in this rustic setting. "Elena Petrovich?" the woman asked, her voice sharp as winter frost. Elena stood up, relief washing over her. "Yes, that is me. Martha Wilson. I own the matchmaking agency." The woman's eyes swept over Elena, assessing her like merchandise. "I'm afraid there's been a complication. Stephen won't be coming." The words landed like stones. "Not coming. But I have traveled so far. We have contract." Martha sighed, the sound heavy with practiced sympathy. "Stephen found another match. Last week, someone more suitable. He asked me to refund his deposit and explain the situation." "Another match?" Elena's voice trembled slightly. "But I am here now. What am I to do?" Martha glanced at her watch impatiently. "There's a small inn in town. You can stay there tonight while we figure things out. Perhaps we can find another gentleman interested in meeting you." The Mountain View Inn was modest but clean, with faded floral wallpaper and a quiet dignity that reminded Eleanor of her grandmother's house. After checking in, Martha asked Eleanor to meet her in the small dining area to discuss options. Eleanor quickly freshened up, changing into her best dress, a simple navy blue affair that she had carefully packed for her first meeting with Stephen. When she descended the stairs to the dining room, she found Martha seated with a young woman who couldn't have been more than 22. The girl was beautiful in a way Elena had never been, golden-haired with delicate features and wide blue eyes. "This is Ruby," Martha said as Elena approached. "She arrived last week and is also waiting for a match." Ruby smiled shyly, offering a small wave. "Nice to meet you." Martha gestured for Elena to sit. "I've been reviewing our client list to see if there might be someone appropriate for you." The way she emphasized appropriate made Elena uncomfortable. "The challenge, Elena, is your age." "My age?" Elena repeated, confused. 30 is. Martha paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound too harsh. "Most of our clients prefer younger women in their early 20s like Ruby. They want brides who can give them many children, who are moldable." The word stung worse than if Martha had simply called her old. Moldable. As if being 30 meant she was set in her ways, difficult, unwilling to adapt. "I am healthy," Elena said quietly. "I can have children. I'm educated. I can contribute to household." Martha patted her hand in a gesture that felt more dismissive than comforting. "Of course, dear. But the fact remains that our clients have specific preferences. I'll see what I can do, but I want to be honest. It may take some time to find someone willing to consider a bride of your maturity. Maturity, another word that felt like a knife. Elena looked down at her hands, suddenly conscious of every fine line that had begun to appear. In Ukraine, 30 wasn't young for a bride, but it wasn't ancient either. Here, it apparently made her damaged goods. Ruby looked uncomfortable, picking at her napkin. "I'm sure someone will want you," she offered, her kindness somehow making everything worse. After a painfully awkward dinner where Martha repeatedly emphasized how flexible they would need to be about Elena's options, Elena retreated to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed, allowing herself one moment of pure, undiluted panic. What if no one wanted her? What if she had spent everything to come here, only to be sent back in shame? She had no home to return to, no job waiting. She unpacked her small suitcase, a few clothes, a book of Pushkin's poetry, a family photo, and her mother's embroidered shawl. These fragments of her former life seemed suddenly insubstantial, as if they belonged to another woman entirely. Sleep eluded her that night. She lay awake watching moonlight filter through thin curtains, casting ghostly patterns across the ceiling. When dawn finally broke, Elena made a decision. She would not wait passively for Martha to determine her fate. She had come too far to surrender now. After dressing carefully in a simple blouse and skirt, Elena left the inn and walked into town. Pinecrest was smaller than she had imagined, just a main street with a handful of businesses, a church with a white steeple, and clusters of houses spreading outward. The mountains that gave the town its name loomed in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Her first stop was the town's only cafe, the Golden Horseshoe. She needed coffee, but more importantly, she needed information. As Elena walked out of the Mountain View Inn for the last time, suitcase in hand, she felt a weight lifting. Whatever came next, she had found her footing in this strange new world. She had found a place to belong, at least for now. Life at E. Blackwell Ranch quickly fell into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were spent working with Bill on his reading exercises. Afternoons often included helping in the main house or exploring the property, and evenings were filled with shared meals and conversation. Elena discovered she had a genuine gift for rehabilitation work, and Bill's progress, though slow, was steady and rewarding. Tom was often busy with ranch operations, but he made time each day to check on his father's progress, his quiet appreciation for Elena's work, evident in the way he listened attentively to her reports. Sometimes they would sit on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, talking about books or Ukraine or the history of the ranch. It was during one such evening, nearly 2 weeks after Elena's arrival, that Tom finally asked the question she had been dreading. "Why did you sign up with the marriage agency?" Elena considered deflecting, but something about the peaceful dusk and Tom's steady presence invited honesty. "In my village, there were no opportunities. After my parents died, there was nothing to keep me there. No job prospects, no." She hesitated. "No marriage prospects. The agency promised new start in America." Tom nodded, understanding. "And Stephen Mills, the man who was supposed to meet you?" "I never met him, just saw a photograph. He seemed kind in his letters." Elena shrugged slightly. "But he found someone younger." "His loss," Tom said simply. The Pinecrest Harvest Festival arrived at the end of Elena's 3rd week at the ranch. The entire town gathered at the community center for a day of food, music, and celebration. Elena had been hesitant to attend, knowing Martha Wilson would likely be there, but Bill had insisted, proud to show off his progress with reading. The festival was in full swing when they arrived, Tom, Elena, and Bill together. Elena felt a flutter of nervousness as heads turned their way. The Blackwells were clearly respected in the community, and her presence alongside them drew curious glances. Martha Wilson approached almost immediately, Ruby in tow. Ruby looked lovely in a blue dress that matched her eyes, but there was a brittleness to her smile that Elena recognized all too well. "Mr. Blackwell," Martha gushed, "what a pleasure to see you at our little celebration. And Mr. Blackwell Sr., how are you feeling?" Bill nodded politely but said nothing, his dislike for Martha evident in his expression. Martha turned to Elena with barely concealed hostility. "Elena, still working as a teacher, is it? How nice for you." "Ms. Petrovich has been invaluable," Tom said firmly. "Dad's reading has improved tremendously under her guidance." Before Martha could respond, the town sheriff approached their group. "Tom, Bill, glad you could make it." He turned to Elena with a friendly smile. "And you must be Ms. Petrovich. I've heard good things about your work with Bill." "Too kind," Elena murmured, feeling Martha's glare like ice at her back. As the evening progressed, Elena was introduced to what seemed like half the town. To her surprise, people were warm and welcoming, genuinely interested in her background and impressed by her work with Bill. By the time they gathered for the community dinner in the decorated hall, Elena felt a tentative sense of belonging. She was heading back from getting coffee when she overheard Martha's voice from behind a partition. "It's scandalous, really. Living under the same roof, unmarried. In my day, we had standards." "They're not under the same roof," came another woman's voice. "She's in the cabin and Tom's in the main house with his father." "Semantics," Martha scoffed. "Mark my words, she's set her sights on him, 30 years old and desperate. Women like that will do anything to secure a husband, especially one with Tom Blackwell's assets." Elena froze, coffee cup trembling in her hand. The worst part wasn't the accusation, it was the seed of truth at its core. She had grown to care deeply for Tom, though she'd never dream of acting on those feelings or betraying his trust. "Gossip doesn't become you, Martha." The new voice belonged to Tom, who had apparently also overheard. Elena remained hidden, unable to move. "Tom! I was just expressing concern for your reputation," Martha backpedaled quickly. "My reputation is my concern, not yours." Tom's voice was calm, but carried an edge of steel. "And Ms. Petrovich's character is beyond reproach. She's intelligent, dedicated, and has transformed my father's quality of life. I won't have her name dragged through the mud by someone who sees people as commodities to be traded." "I only meant—" "I know exactly what you meant," Tom cut her off. "And I'll thank you to keep your opinions to yourself, unless you'd like the whole town to hear my opinions about your business practices." Elena slipped away before she could be discovered, her heart pounding. She found Bill at their table, reading the festival program with careful concentration. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing her flushed cheeks. "Yes," she said, willing it to be true. "Everything is fine." Later that night, after they had returned to the ranch, Elena sat on the small porch of her cabin, wrapped in her mother's shawl against the autumn chill. The stars were impossibly bright, scattered across the vast Montana sky like diamonds, on black velvet. She heard footsteps approaching and knew without looking that it was Tom. He settled into the chair beside her, offering a mug of something steaming that smelled of cinnamon and apples. "Cider," he explained, "Dad's recipe." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping cider and watching the stars. Finally, Tom spoke. "I'm sorry about Martha Wilson. She had no right to say those things." Elena's heart skipped. "You knew I overheard? I saw you walking away." He turned to look at her directly. "None of it is true. You know that, right?" Elena nodded, but doubt must have shown in her expression. "Elena." The way he said her name, softly, almost reverently, made her look up. "I need to tell you something. I knew who you were before you arrived in Pinecrest." Confusion replaced embarrassment. A coalition of former clients, women who came through Martha's agency but had relatively positive experiences, is talking about establishing a new kind of introduction service. Ethical, transparent, focused on cultural exchange rather than transactions. They've asked if the center would be willing to provide guidance, perhaps serve as a partner. The concept intrigued Elena. Not eliminating the service, but transforming it, addressing the legitimate need for connection while removing the exploitation. It has potential. Their conversation was interrupted by Sophia, who emerged from her office with a warmth that had nothing to do with her professional demeanor. Elena, welcome back, and perfect timing. The board meeting is about to start. The Blackwell Foundation board meeting, Elena's first as an official member, proceeded with surprising efficiency. Funding allocations were reviewed, grant applications considered, and strategic priorities discussed with a blend of pragmatism and vision that reminded Elena why she had accepted the invitation to join. Next item, announced the board chair, a retired judge who had been among the first to support the center, the proposed scholarship program for immigrant women pursuing higher education. Elena, as this was your initiative, would you like to present? Elena outlined the proposal she had developed during her maternity leave, a structured program to support women like Ruby who wished to pursue college degrees or vocational certifications but lacked financial resources. The foundation would provide not just tuition assistance, but comprehensive support, including childcare stipends, transportation, and mentorship. The goal is to remove practical barriers, she explained, allowing these women to focus on their studies without having to choose between education and basic needs. We've identified 10 potential candidates through the center's programs, women with clear goals and demonstrated commitment. The discussion that followed was thoughtful and constructive, focusing on implementation details rather than questioning the fundamental value of the initiative. By the meeting's end, the scholarship program had been unanimously approved for launch in the fall semester, with Elena designated as program director. As board members gathered their materials and prepared to depart, Elena found herself in conversation with Harriet Jenkins, the town's former mayor and the board's oldest member at 74. "I remember when you first arrived in Pinecrest," Harriet remarked, her keen eyes twinkling. "There was quite the buzz about the mail-order bride who'd been left stranded. Town speculation was running wild." Elena smiled, no longer discomfited by references to her arrival. That chapter of her story, once a source of shame, had been transformed into simply one aspect of a much richer narrative. "I imagine I was quite the topic at the beauty parlor for a few days." "More than a few," Harriet chuckled. "And then again when Tom offered you the position at the ranch. Plenty of gossip about that, I can tell you. Some said it was charity. Others suspected romance from the start. And what did you think?" Elena asked, genuinely curious about this outside perspective on a pivotal moment in her life. Harriet considered the question, her lined face thoughtful. "I thought it was recognition. One capable person recognizing capability in another, despite circumstances that might have obscured it from less perceptive eyes." She patted Eleanor's hand. "I've sat on this board since Walter Blackwell, Tom's grandfather, established it. I've watched the Blackwell men make decisions for 3 generations. They don't act from charity or impulse. They see value and they invest in it." Her smile deepened. "Just as you've done with the center. Recognizing value in women others dismissed. Investing in potential others couldn't see." The parallel struck Elena with unexpected force. Perhaps that initial connection with Tom, the moment in the cafe when he had looked past Martha Wilson's dismissive assessment to see Elena's true capabilities, had been about recognition, a mutual awareness of worth that transcended circumstances. After the meeting, Elena made her way to the center's nursery, recently established to support mothers participating in programs. Several infants and toddlers played under the watchful eyes of certified caregivers, their diverse faces representing the growing international community within Pinecrest. One of the caregivers, a grandmotherly woman named Dorothy, approached with a warm smile. "Come to check on our little ones? We're doing just fine, as you can see." "It looks wonderful," Elena affirmed, watching as two toddlers cooperatively stacked blocks while a baby observed from a bouncy seat. "How many families are using the service now?" 17 regularly, with a few drop-ins, Dorothy reported proudly. "Makes all the difference for the mothers attending classes or using the computer lab. They can focus completely, knowing their children are safe and happy just down the hall." The nursery had been among Elena's highest priorities for the center's expansion, a direct response to the barrier that childcare responsibilities often presented for women seeking education or employment. The foundation's funding had allowed for professional staffing and high-quality equipment, creating an environment parents could trust. As Elena prepared to leave, Dorothy hesitated, then spoke with evident sincerity. "I was skeptical at first, you know. When the center opened, thought it might bring problems, changing too much too fast. But I was wrong." She gestured toward the children playing harmoniously, despite their different backgrounds. "This is Pinecrest's future right here, stronger for its diversity, more interesting, more resilient." The observation stayed with Elena as she departed the center, choosing to walk the short distance to the Golden Horseshoe Cafe for lunch before returning to the ranch. The same cafe where, less than 2 years earlier, Martha Wilson had delivered her crushing assessment, "Too old at 30." The cafe had changed little. Same worn countertops, same coffee-scented warmth, same Betty behind the counter with her ready smile. But Pinecrest itself had transformed in subtle yet significant ways. The international influence was evident in new businesses along Main Street, a small Vietnamese grocery, a Ukrainian bakery operated part-time by Elena's friend, Natalia, a clothing shop featuring handcrafted items from various cultures. Most telling was the easy interaction Elena observed between long-time residents and newcomers. Genuine conversation over coffee, shared tables at lunch, the organic connections that developed when people recognized common ground despite different origins. "Your usual?" Betty asked as Elena slid onto a counter stool. "Please, how's business?" Betty poured coffee and called Elena's sandwich order to the kitchen before answering. "Better than ever. These international ladies love their coffee, and they tip better than the cowboys, between you and me." Elena laughed, savoring the simple pleasure of this familiar exchange. As she waited for her food, the bell above the door jangled, and a woman entered. Well-dressed, middle-aged, with a purposeful stride that immediately captured attention. Elena recognized her from photographs. Caroline Wilson, Martha's younger sister from Helena. Caroline approached the counter directly, her gaze finding Elena with unerring precision. "Mrs. Blackwell? I'm Caroline Wilson. I was hoping to speak with you." Betty raised an eyebrow but moved discreetly away, giving them privacy while remaining protectively within earshot. "Ms. Wilson," Elena acknowledged, instinctively straightening. "What can I do for you?" Caroline settled onto the adjacent stool, her expression unreadable. "I've been handling Martha's affairs since her arrest, clearing out her house, settling accounts. It's been illuminating. I had no idea the extent of what she was doing." "I'm sorry," Elena offered sincerely. "It must be difficult to reconcile the sister you knew with the actions that came to light." A flicker of surprise crossed Caroline's features, perhaps at the genuine compassion in Elena's tone. "Thank you. It has been. Martha and I were never close. 10 years between us, different fathers, different priorities, but still family." She paused as Betty delivered Elena's sandwich, waiting, until they were alone again before continuing. I found something in Martha's records that I thought you should see. Files on the women she brought to America over the years. Hundreds of them, dating back almost 20 years. Detailed information, backgrounds, preferences, skills, and updates on their outcomes. Marriages, divorces, relocations. The revelation made Elena's chest tighten with a mixture of concern and anticipation. Why show me? Caroline reached into her handbag, withdrawing a sealed envelope, because some of these women might benefit from the center's services, even years later, and because Martha's notes reveal patterns that might help prevent similar exploitation in the future. She placed the envelope on the counter between them. This is a complete copy of the files. I've already provided the originals to the federal investigators, but they're focused on building their case. You might see other implications, other ways the information could help. Elena regarded the envelope with a blend of wariness and recognition of its potential value. Why trust me with this? I was hardly your sister's favorite person. A hint of a smile touched Caroline's lips. Perhaps that's precisely why. Martha's judgment was clearly compromised in many areas. Her assessment of you as unsuitable may be the most compelling character reference possible under the circumstances. She stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced elegance.